Sean, embark on a journey to understand what's happening in my own head. Spoiler alert, I have no clue, but that's precisely why we're here. In each episode, I explore questions about the brain that I believe will resonate with all of us. Like, why can't I turn my brain off at 3 a.m.? Why my memory only works when it feels like it? And why my brain seems to betray me when I need it most. Listen, I'm not a scientist. I'm no expert. I'm just a guy looking to unravel the mysteries of my own mind. Fortunately, I happen to know a cognitive neuroscientist who is an expert in the brain, and I get to ask him all the questions I want. So, if you're curious, confused, or simply along for the ride, welcome. And hey, if you like what you hear, don't forget to like, follow, subscribe to the podcast, or whatever it is you do wherever you listen to podcasts. I don't know how the algorithms work. I just know that your support keeps this journey moving forward. And together, we might just discover something remarkable. This is John Teaches Sean about his brain. Let's get started. Hi, John. It's good to see you.
Hey, Sean. Good seeing you too.
So every week, I ask you what's on your mind, and I like that format. But I'm going to steal your thunder here. I wanted to ask you a question about something that was on my mind.
Oh, good.
So the question that I had is, have you ever heard of the Mandela effect?
The Mandela effect?
Yes.
You know what? That sounds familiar for some reason, but I cannot place why. How about you explain it to me?
Well, I can tell you about it. So it's relatively new. I think it was like 2013 that, oh no, what's her name? There was Fiona Broome is her name. And so Fiona Broome, personally, this is according to her, but she distinctly remembers Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s. And now, according to her, now just to jump ahead, Nelson Mandela died in like 2013, I think. So he died in the mid 2010s, 2013-ish. But she remembers watching the news footage of his funeral, his widow speaking. I mean, really, what would you call them? Like, they're not dense memories, but like really specific memories from the 80s. And then, so as she was kind of talking to the more people that she talked about it to, they were like, yeah, I remember him dying in prison in South Africa so essentially, I think for you, what I'm calling the Mandela effect is like a collective false memory. And then so she was encouraged to write a book about it. She wrote a book about the Mandela effect, so that people like me, I mean, again, bro science, but I've been calling it the Mandela effect. But there's so many of these, and I'm trying to, since I brought it up, now I'm on the spot. So many of these. I'm a Star Wars nerd. So I know that under the category of collective false memory is Darth Vader in Empire Strikes Back saying, "Luke, I am your father." It's been quoted in parodies and other places. He never said that. That's not the actual quote. It's, "No, I am your father." But we all say, "Luke, I am your father." We all remember that being the line. And you know what? There was another one they found. You know the game Monopoly?
Yeah.
Okay, so on the board, on the picture, does the Monopoly guy, can you describe him?
Yeah, he's a little guy with a round face and a kind of a handlebar mustache with a top hat and maybe a moniker on one eye.
Monocle? He's got a monocle, right?
With a jacket and a tie.
Yeah, a cane, a top hat, a monocle.
I don't remember the cane.
Okay, you remember a top hat and a monocle?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
It looks, I think, a tuxedo with tails.
Yep. So would it surprise you if I told you that the Monopoly guy has never had a monocle in any iteration of Monopoly?
I thought you were going to say, would it surprise you if I told you the Monopoly guy is actually a woman.
No, but that was one of
I
the examples given. He doesn't have a monocle.
Wow,
But almost
thought he did.
everyone who is familiar with the game of Monopoly, when asked to describe the Monopoly man, he has a monocle.
See, there
And
you go. I'm right. Everybody's brain
you're
works the same.
you're right with all of us, right? Whether or not it's because preconceived expectations of what a rich guy looks like, maybe, but we all, the thing that fascinates me is that we all remember it that way
Hmm.
collectively. And I'm trying, like I said, I'm trying to I should have done some research, but there
That's
was
what you have me for.
Curious George having a tail when he doesn't. Just all of these collective memories that we just misremember.
Hmm.
Um, all of these things, and so it kind of got me thinking. I wanted to ask you, not necessarily about the Mandela effect itself, but just memory, and the human brain.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to dive into, if you're again okay with kind of diving into just talking a little bit, you and I, about memory.
Yeah. So I have a lot of things to say about what what you just brought up. That's a really good way to start a topic about memory because there's so many things in there we can discuss. Um, I think I'll start with the Mandela effect,
Okay, perfect.
just because it's not, that isn't what I thought. It sounded familiar for some reason, but I didn't know why. But that wasn't what I was thinking. So I have not heard of that.
Oh,
So I have some questions. So this woman that had the memory,
hmm,
and when she started talking to other people, they remembered the same thing. Is that right?
yes,
And that their memory was that he had died in prison in the 1980s.
correct.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so I probably want to stay away from figuring out her initial memory. I have some thoughts on that, but they're probably not relevant and may not, you know, I'm just going to stay away from that. But when she starts asking other people, that brings up one part of memory called suggestibility. And that's
Okay.
a huge part of memory in how you ask people questions, how you phrase things can help, that can create false memories. Elizabeth Loftus did a ton of studies on this, on how to create false memories in people. And she set up she set up experiments to show how it can happen, which are really difficult to do because there's ethical concerns about implanting false memories. So she had to be really careful how she went about that. I'll tell you a quick story. We were talking about this in class when I was teaching cognitive psych at Minnesota State University, and I was telling the students about false memories. We were talking about this idea and how memories are so malleable and suggestible that if you start talking about stuff, you can get people to remember things that never happened. And gave some examples from Elizabeth Loftus, and we met on like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So this was like a Monday or Wednesday lecture. I don't remember which, but I just know it
Hmm.
was the same week. It was the next class in the same week. Two of the students came up to me and said, "Professor Page, guess what we did?" I said, "What?" And said, "We created a false memory in a guy." And I said, "What?" So we had a guy at work and we set this up and we told him a story. I told him a story and she confirmed it. And as we talked about it, he's going, "Yeah, I remember that too." And I'm like, "No, don't take this information and use it for bad. Don't go create false memories. I'm telling you what to be aware of, not how to use it as a weapon." No, but suggestibility is so strong that you can, just by talking, just saying things like, "Do you remember when this happened?" Because saying,
Right.
"Do you remember," then puts that on the person like, "I remember it. You should." And it's not that it's a conscious thought of, "Oh, I've got to be sure." It's just like when you said, "Have you heard of the Mandela effect?" I was like, that sounds familiar. And I don't know, but maybe my back channel was saying, you probably should have heard about it. So maybe that's why it was giving me a familiar feeling. I don't know. I couldn't place it. But what you brought up was something totally different than what I was
Hmm.
thinking about.
Yeah.
So there's that part of it, like don't you remember this? Or do you remember when this happened? You're wanting to say yes to start with. So that's the suggestibility part is huge. We can talk more about that if you want. The second thing I was going to bring up was when you asked about the Monopoly figure
Mm-hmm.
and Curious George. When you're asked to describe something, you have to go back into your memory and try to recall what it is you're going to describe. And when you recall something like that, that's not really familiar to you, like if you were to ask me to describe Casey, that would be much different. A Monopoly figure I've seen multiple times, obviously, but it's not something that I have, it's just not something that you really attach yourself to, but it's something that you know about. So that means you have to go back in your memory and you rely on your schemas. And so now my schema of the wealthy person, this is probably from movies, even black and white movies, of the cane and the hat dancing around with the handlebar mustache and the monocle, and
Mm-hmm.
you're out dancing and carrying on. So that's what comes to mind is my schema of that. And a memory schema is the best representation, or not the best, the average, the most common representation of what it is you're thinking of. And so those items help describe that kind of person you're trying to describe. And like Curious George is a monkey. Monkeys have tails. Chimpanzees
Yes.
don't, but monkeys do. So
Right.
yeah, there's things that you kind of tie into it that will affect your recall of those items.
So two questions. If I can go back to if I would have asked you the question differently, if I would have said, John, do you remember when we were talking about the Mandela effect? Even though knowing you and I have never talked about it, if I asked you that question, then you would be more likely to say yes to that.
I would be more likely to remember that,
To and yeah,
to
that's
have a
better said.
memory of it.
Yes.
And part of that is who is asking you. So if
Hmm.
it's somebody that's reliable and that you trust, which would
So
be
not
you.
me, not
No,
me.
it would be
No.
you because you're careful about stuff like that. Like you
Yeah.
always, to you, words matter, how you say things matter. So you're really a stickler on stuff like that. So if you said to me, do you remember when we had that conversation? My presumption would be that we had that conversation. And so then I would be going, okay, we had it. Now let me see if I can remember it, which would make me probably more likely to say yes, not because I'm trying to lie about it, but just
Right.
because I might form that memory of it. And if it would be somebody that's not reliable, I might go, yeah, I don't, I'd probably be more likely to think through my memory a little bit more. Not that I wouldn't say yes, but I'd probably think more about it.
Interesting. But yeah,
And
so just the way that you phrase the question or a sentence. I mean, I want to be really clear on this though. You're saying because you just said it, not only would you say yes,
mhm.
but you would have a memory of that conversation.
So let me tell you, excuse me, let me tell you about some research that we did where we
Okay.
created false memories. And this is, I started to say this is a project you were involved in, but you weren't. But it was in California. We were doing some research with in the Bay Area with a group, and we were at an academy, and we set up a scene where uh, the students that were training to be police officers would come into a room, and there was an event taking place where they had role players, and so they had scripts they had to read, and they were supposed to act and say things the same way every time, so that each student that came in received the same information that we would then question them about later.
Okay.
And one of the questions was, do you remember seeing a knife? Because we had a rubber knife, a fake knife sitting over to the side. And then another question was, do you remember seeing the baseball bat? And there was not a baseball bat. And so we changed the reason we asked that is because Elizabeth Loftus conducted some studies to show just changing the word the to a. So did you see a bat versus did you see the bat, created a significant difference in how people responded. Because if you say, did you see a baseball bat? Then it's almost like there could have been one or there might not have been one. So you think about it a little bit more and you're more likely to say, I don't remember seeing it. But if you say, did you see the baseball bat? Now it's like, oh, there was one there. And we found that same difference when we use the word the. It was a significantly higher amount of students said, yes, I saw it, versus if we said a baseball bat. They were very few. I think there was maybe only one person that answered yes to that, but there were like 8 people that answered yes to the. So it was something like that. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it was a huge change. Again, just because of the way you ask the question infers certain things. Mm-hmm. So if you infer things like, your example would have been, you would have directly said, do you remember the conversation we had?
Right.
So right. You can implant memories in people. You can get them to think they remember things just by how you word questions. And especially if it's somebody in authority, you're much more likely to agree to seeing something, saying something, or doing something that you didn't see, say, or do, if they're an authority figure and tell you that you did in a roundabout way.
So I'm wondering at this point in the podcast if I need to put some kind of like advisory statement or a warning in the beginning about ethics and not using this information.
Yeah, maybe
for evil.
Yeah, maybe so.
Because I feel like you're giving some people the recipe here for some bad behavior. But no. So that part's really interesting. Is just changing one word can affect someone's memory.
Well, another good example, if I could just give it, because this tells it a little bit different way. Elizabeth Loftus and her research team showed a video of a car running into the back of another car. And then she asked people questions about that video. And she changed one word in the sentence. She said, how fast do you think the car was going when it bumped into, how fast do you think the red car was going when it bumped into the green car, or something like that? Mm-hmm. How fast was the red car going when it smashed into the blue car? So she changed, I think she had 5 different words, and they progressively got more and more kind of violent, aggressive, right, in their way they were said, in their meaning. And she found that she did use, a lot of students in her research to find this out. So it wasn't like 5 people she asked, it was hundreds. And she found that the bumped word, I think it was bumped, was significantly lower speed. It was like, 27 miles an hour, to saying smashed into the other car, it was like 38 miles an hour. So anyway, the miles per hour went up with each time the word got a little bit more aggressive. Their memory of how fast the car was going increased based on how the word she used to describe the crash. And then also she would say, was there glass at the scene? And there wasn't in the video. But for those that saw bumped or whatever, they would say no. But those that said it smashed, like basically all of them said, yes, there was glass at the scene, when there wasn't. And they were told going in, you're going to watch a video and you're going to be an eyewitness to this video. So be sure you pay close attention. So it's not like that was thrown in as a trick. They were watching it to report on it, and how she asked the questions changed how they reported on it.
Okay. So because this has me thinking about law enforcement, especially probably more so for detectives than patrol officers. But I think just so law enforcement, they're an authority figure, and they're asking witnesses or victims or someone about an event that happened, and the way that they ask, the way they form the question, you're saying, can alter people's memories.
Absolutely. There's been so much research around that. Yes.
Okay. Good to know. And so then the other thing, because I said there were 2 things and I got way off on a tangent there, but the first one was words matter. The way that you ask the question can do that. But I'm kind of, I want to go back to when we're talking about memories. So the way that I ask you the question, do you remember the conversation we had about the Mandela effect? And we kind of talked about you going, yes, I remember that, but how this, I might be asking the question wrong, but let's see if I can get you there. But how strong is the memory for you when you say, yes, I remember that? And because let me ask it a different way. We're talking about an event that didn't actually occur,
Mm-hmm.
but asked in such a way that I make you believe, because it's me and you trust me, all of those things, that it did occur. How strong is that recollect? How strong is that memory for you
And you're talking in general
in
for the
general?
person that's being asked.
Yes.
It can be really strong. Like there's other studies where they would talk to some people and ask them about an event that these are adults now, but their parents were kind of in on the study, where the
Oh.
researchers said, "Can we come to your house?" And they would volunteer for this study and say, "Can we come and do what?" And then they would contact the parents and say, "Don't let this participant know, but this is a study on memory, and we want to. Here's some 5 things, 5 different memories. Can you all ensure that this person has never experienced any of these 5 things?" And one was being lost in the mall
Okay.
when you were 8 or
Mm-hmm.
something. And then the parents both agree, no, our son or daughter was never lost in the mall. We remember that, and they don't. So they would say, okay, so that's a memory we'll choose. So when we bring it up and say, do you remember something from your child, and you guys come up with it and say, oh, you were lost in the mall that time when you were 8, remember? To kind of plant that in their son or daughter's memory. And they found that some of them, after they said, "Oh, I do kind of remember that," then the researcher would say, "Well, tell us about that. And do you remember the person? The was it a man or a woman that took your hand?" They were going, "Oh, it was actually a man. A man came up and took my hand." They would even say, like, "What was he wearing?" He was wearing a plaid shirt. I mean, they would go into a lot of detail because as they're forming this in their mind, memory. People make a mistake to think that a memory is like a photograph that you put in a manila folder and slide it in a file cabinet that 10 years later you say, oh, I want to look at that photo. And you open the file cabinet and pull it out and go, oh, yeah, that's the photo. That's not how memories work. Memories are stored in the synaptic connections of networks in the brain that are traces that if you have other things that are similar to that memory, they kind of get thrown in together. So you can, if this person is saying, "Oh, I remember that person," it could be that they saw a television show where a guy grabbed a kid's hand that had on a
Mm-hmm.
plaid shirt. They say, "Oh, he was balding. He was in his 50s. He had a plaid shirt." They're drawing that from a lot. Your brain is going back and searching, going, "Oh, we're having to search for a man taking a child, taking us or a child." So it starts putting this stuff together. Not that they're lying about it. It's just if they're searching their memory, they're trying to figure out what it is that was being that happened, and they're trying to add details to it. And so, an example is people a lot of times gets mixed up when they'll have a story. Do you remember at summer camp when this certain thing happened? And they'll go, yes, and so was there. And then another person will say, that person wasn't there. And they say, yes. And then you look at it and find out they were there a different year, so they couldn't have been there. And you have this memory of summer camp. So all the
Mm-hmm.
summer camps kind of get combined into one. So now it's hard to tease out which happened when. And it's really fascinating how that can all kind of tie together. And you can give a lot of details about something that never happened, and you can believe that it really did happen.
Yeah, like I really like what you just said about, because I want to expand on that a little bit. The analogy where you said, summer camp in 1989 for me. I'm old, but summer camp 1989, and I take that snapshot and I put it in a Manila folder, and I'm going to take that a step further and say, and then I put it into the filing cabinet under summer camp 1989. And then in 1990, I go back to the same summer camp. So that's a new file folder, right?
Yeah.
So I'm separating the years that I was at that same summer camp. And then when I want to retrieve that memory, I just go back to the file cabinet and go summer camp 1990. and pull
Flip
out the
through it till you get
picture.
to the year you want and then pull that out. Yeah.
Exactly. But, and again, I'm saying that's the mistaken belief that that's
Hmm.
how your memory works. But
Yeah.
in actuality, there's summer camp. It's a big blob of summer camp,
Hmm.
and it all kind of gets mashed together. So my 1990 is actually all of the summer camps. And so the event that happens in 1990 that I'm talking to somebody that I was at summer camp with and go, yeah, and such was there. And they're like, they didn't go to summer camp with us. They went, with you. I wasn't there with you, whatever.
Hmm.
Now it's like in my brain, yes, they were. I can remember them,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
again, the idea that memory is, I don't want to say corruptible, but your memory can be corrupted, right? Like little slices of the memory.
Yeah, I think that's so I first want to say that memory is amazing. The fact that we can remember that we went to a camp in 1989, or that you did, that you can remember that. I would have been probably the camp counselor because I was older in
Oh, stop.
1989. But the fact that you can remember that is crazy. Like things that happened to us, and we can years later remember those. It's just it's crazy. And in fact, researchers, when I was in graduate school in '89, were debating whether memories, or whether you ever lose memories, or whether they're
Hmm.
permanent or not.
Right.
Like, do memories fade and go completely away, or is it just that we can't recall them? They're there, but they're so old that we can't recall them, type of thing. Because, and it's crazy how much you can remember, especially if you're given like old memories. I'm meaning distant memories, that if somebody can give you certain little threads, you can start going, oh yes, and pick it back up and weave it all back together and be fairly accurate. And so your memories about summer camp in '89 are probably 95% accurate, or 90% accurate. But it's the 10% that you believe that you're not quite sure of.
So, okay. So what if you can remember, oh boy, I don't want to pin you down on numbers, but I like, just for general conversation, the 90% that we can remember, which I want to reiterate what you said. That's pretty amazing.
If that's the
That
number. I don't know that that's the number,
I,
but if
I knew
that's,
you were going to
but
say that.
memories are amazing. That's the point. Memory
Yes,
is amazing.
but how is there a way to account for that lost 10% or whatever the actual number is?
Yeah.
Because
So,
are those the details?
so let me say it like this. If you take out the idea that a memory is something that's like a picture or written down on paper that you
Hmm.
can set aside and then pull back later and see it exactly, or a camcorder, like it's a video that you can replay over and over. Take that completely out of your mind when you're thinking about memory, and think of it as events happen, all your sensory systems are taking in this information, and if it's important to you in some way, there during your night's sleep afterwards, it's going to start getting consolidated, and those the network that's all kind of firing at the same time, that's creating this kind of neural network of a memory, gets strengthened with sleep and all of that, and now that's your preserved memory, and it's from your sensory systems and from your emotions and from the context and your knowledge at the time. There's so much that goes into that, and then when you recall that memory later, you're not pulling something up, you're kind of retracing that pathway. You're letting those neurons in that network fire again in a way that brings that memory back to your mind, and so that you can have that feeling of it.
Hmm.
But now when those fire, they are being kind of, I don't want to say rewritten, but what's getting kind of encoded back with them are your emotions and your feelings now, and how you understand contextually things now. Then that gets kind of put back in, and then the next time you remember it, now it's a blend of your first time that the thing happened and your memory of it, your recall of it later, and now you're adding your new emotions and context and knowledge on top of that when it gets restored. And so the more, you know, the more times you're recalling something, then certain part, the gist of it stays the same, but the small details start getting changed around. That's why people say memory is malleable. And
Mm-hmm.
it's also kind of the hindsight bias gets put into it. So let's say that something dramatic happens to you. Let's say that your girlfriend breaks up with you in high school, and that's
Okay.
a very dramatic event, and it comes out of nowhere. You didn't see it coming, and it's devastating. And then later, and you ruminate on it, so you think about it a lot. But then as you get a few years later and you're past it, or maybe you're with somebody else or whatever, as you think about it, now you're going, man, there were signs. I should have known this or that. So now your memory is, oh, I knew it was going to happen. I saw
Right.
it coming because of these 4 or 5 things that were evident, but they weren't evident at the time. But now that you have more knowledge and information and your emotions have changed a little bit, you can say, I actually wasn't that upset. Have you ever reminded somebody about a memory where you thought somebody kind of lost it in an event? You say, remember that time you lost it when this happened? They're going,
Mm-hmm.
I remember it happening, but I didn't lose it. I was cool and calm. And that's their memory now. And they're not, a lot of times, so sometimes they might be trying to save face, but I think a lot of times it's just, at the moment they thought their world was going to end, and then, not literally, but they thought their world was ending, and then after it didn't end, you're thinking back on it going, yeah, it wasn't that big a deal. And so that
Right.
influences how you remember it when you recall it later, because it's not like pulling a picture out and showing your face in horror when somebody breaks up with you. It's your memory, all these things getting meshed together that you're recalling.
And then is there a piece of that? And I think you said it, but I want to kind of drill down on, is there a piece of when I retrieve that memory, is there a piece of how I would handle it now that influences that at all?
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
that's the context of now.
context, okay, the context of now
And
then.
your emotions now.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I wouldn't be as emotional because I realized that didn't destroy my life. So
right.
I wouldn't be as emotional. So, and then, yeah, all of that fits back into it.
But my memory of the event is really strong, how I responded to it.
Hmm.
Again, I keep going back to, I think this might be, you and I talked about Malcolm Gladwell.
Don't do this to me. You're experimenting on me right in the middle of the podcast.
No, no, no,
Remember that
no.
time we talked about Malcolm Gladwell?
I didn't. That was unintentional.
Okay.
I said not to use these powers for evil.
Yeah, that's right. I thought you were
No,
starting to. All
no,
right,
no,
go
no.
ahead.
But I'm trying to remember. But he talked about in either a book or his podcast. I think his podcast. He did a really good season of his podcast on memory, where he talked about Brian Williams and what happened with
Oh,
Brian
yeah,
Williams
yeah.
on
I do remember
national
that.
TV.
Yep.
But also he talked about, and I think you know about this outside of Malcolm Gladwell, but there when the towers came down on 9/11, there were some researchers who did this research study that you're familiar with that,
Yeah.
minus the Malcolm Gladwell part, right?
Yep. Hmm.
What struck me, and maybe you can talk about this more, is why I keep talking about the power of these memories, is that there was one person, I believe it was a female, who she part of this research was to write down these 5 answers to these questions. And I don't remember the questions, but like, where were you when you
Hmm.
received news of the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers? Right. And I don't know the actual question, but they asked these questions. Where were you? How did you find out about it? But, who were you with or whatever? And then you were to write down in your own handwriting your answers to these questions. Okay. And that happened within, and maybe you can help me. I think but it was relatively soon after the event.
Hmm.
And then they brought these people back and asked them the same questions, like 6 months, a year, 18 months, whatever it was.
Hmm.
And at one point, I think it was about 18 months, but in between a year and 18 months, she came back and she answered the questions completely different. And then they showed her what she had written down. And she looked at those and said, I don't know why I wrote that, but that's not what happened.
Hmm. And
So
they'd say, is that your handwriting?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's my
my
handwriting.
handwriting, but that's not the.
Then why did you write it? I have no idea why I did that, but that's not what happened.
And so when I'm speaking to the power of memory, when you are looking at your own handwriting, when you've
Mm-hmm.
been asked the same question several times over the course of a year and a half, and then your answer changes so dramatically. And then when faced with evidence, I'll call evidence, your handwriting,
Mm-hmm.
your that's why I'm talking about the power of memory. Your brain is like, that is not the answer. That's not the memory. Am I making sense? I know I didn't ask a question, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and so the studies originally that were done is people felt like that they, and this was back like after John Kennedy was shot, and
Mm,
so a few years later, people had these memories about where they were and different things, and they started talking about those as flashbulb memories, a big event that
hmm.
everybody experiences, a society experiences, and how you have like societal memories from that, and everybody should remember that. And there were some people that were questioning because they said those memories are probably infallible because that's a flashbulb. That's like a flashbulb went off and it froze everything in time. So
Yep.
now you're going to remember those. And some researchers were going, yeah, that's a big event, but a lot of personal things that happen to you are just as big as here in the, it's not as far as society, but in your life, you have some traumatic things that happen to you too that are as traumatic or more than a president getting shot for you personally,
Right.
not for the nation, but for you personally. And
Right.
so they
Right.
were saying that there's probably not much to this flashbulb idea. It's just that it's a very emotional memory, but it doesn't mean you're going to remember it any better. So they wanted to study that, but there wasn't any proof when people would say, yeah, I heard it at this point or I was at this place. So researchers were, some of them who were studying memory researchers were thinking if something like this ever happens again, then let's ask people about it. And I think the space shuttle might have been the next one in the 1980s when the space shuttle exploded with the teacher on board,
1986.
86. And they asked some people, but I think they waited till the next semester and they handed out some questionnaires and people were answering it and then asked them a year later and found differences. But they thought that's still, some time passed. And I'm going off memory on this too, so I could be a little bit wrong on this. But then I think it's University of Illinois and somewhere else, a couple of professors at two different universities had a questionnaire ready and said, if anything ever happens again,
Mm,
we're gonna make sure we get it right when it happens. And it was the towers that went down in New York City,
yeah.
and it was like 3 days later they gave their students questionnaires, freshmen in college, first year
Oh,
students.
I didn't remember that part.
It
Okay.
was in the first year students classes because they wanted to follow up, you know, students transfer, leave, especially if it's close to graduation, they might graduate or whatever.
Right.
So they wanted to get
Right.
first year students. And I think they waited at, like you said, maybe a year and a half, like 3 semesters or something.
Hmm.
And they looked all of them up. And there was like 60% that filled it out they could find and have them refill it out. And that's where they came up with, uh, most of them would have 4 of the questions correct or 3. And there were some that had all 5 correct, but most of them was like 3 or 4 questions. But yeah, there were a few of them that had none of them right. Like everything changed. Like, where were you when you heard about the towers? They would say, oh, I was in my dorm room and somebody knocked on the door and told me. And
Hmm.
then 3 semesters later, they'll say, I was in the cafeteria with everyone. We saw it on TV. And it's like, that's not even close to what you said. And the interesting thing, like you said, is they would argue with their past self who was right there,
Hmm.
who was gave the answer. It's like, it's because that memory now, it's been recalled and told, and they probably heard other people talk about when they heard it, or they might have heard, my friend said I was eating, or their parents might have said. They're hearing all these different things, and that starts to get meshed in because memories are malleable. It's like clay that you can kind of work around. And now they're thinking, that was me when I was eating, and I was probably, if I was eating, I was in the
I was.
cafeteria because that's where I always ate breakfast.
Oh
So that's
wow.
my schema
Yeah.
of when I eat, it's in the cafeteria at breakfast. So I was there with everybody, and there were TVs in our cafeteria. So I had to have seen it on the
Hmm.
TV. And so that's where it kind of, things can get really mixed up. And then people believe that. It's not about lying. And so I think we need to be really careful. Like Malcolm Gladwell said about Brian Williams, labeling him as a liar because his memories were off a little bit. Everybody's memories are off a little bit.
Yeah.
And we need
Well,
to
can
realize that, not put a moral value judgment on somebody's past memory.
So I just want to touch on that because I brought it up, but I'm sure everyone is familiar with what happened to Brian Williams. But Brian Williams, there is he was I think he's still on NBC, but he was a famous news anchor. He was the face
Evening
of the news.
news. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and over the course of his career, he was talking about being in Iraq during the initial invasion. Maybe I'm getting some of this wrong too, but either way, the point of it is that I'm questioning everything, John.
Yeah, you
Brought up,
should. We all should.
you brought up the space shuttle, and I'm like, I remember I was in 5th or 6th grade. They wheeled in the TV on the cart, that was strapped down to the
Yeah.
cart,
Uh-huh.
and we watched the space shuttle launch in the classroom and watched it explode live. And I'm like, did I? Now I don't know. But Brian Williams, there's footage of Brian Williams on the ground, flak jacket, and he's saying, I'm here in Iraq, and just 30 minutes ago, this helicopter behind me, and there's a helicopter on fire behind him, was shot down, nada da 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 da, and then a couple of years later, he's and I'm for brevity, I'm kind of mashing a lot of information together, but a couple of years later, he tells a story, and he's in the helicopter right behind the one that gets shot down. And so he's in the story, in his memory, he scrubbed 30 minutes to make it maybe more be dramatic. I don't know what the bigger fish thing is, right?
But think about seeing that helicopter crash and the danger involved, and that could have been me. So you're feeling vulnerable, and like I could have been hurt in that. And then that vulnerability could be, I was right behind it. I could have been hurt. I mean, it's right. It can get changed around. Yeah.
But then the final piece to this, and I don't think that there was much backlash or anybody said anything when he said I was in a helicopter right behind the one that was shot down. It was then the last time he told the story on national TV was he was in the helicopter that was shot down. Yeah. And so all of these people, and I think rightfully, there were people who were on the helicopter that was shot down that emailed NBC, like, and so everyone was saying, how can it be anything other than a lie? You would have to remember that you were in a helicopter that was shot down. There's no way you couldn't not remember that.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's
that makes sense. Like I wouldn't forget that. I mean, that's always the litmus test is I would know if I got shot down.
Right. If I was in a helicopter that was shot down, I would remember.
I would know, yeah.
Right. And that was the problem with what happened with him is everyone said the same thing. Mm-hmm. If I was on that helicopter, I would know. And so he lied to everyone, and we have to trust him. But I'll make the stance right now. I don't think, and again, I'm stealing a cribbing from Malcolm Gladwell. He made a better argument than I am. But, I think that when we look at our own memories, and then so I want to go back too and ask, because I brought up like the bigger fish thing, right? But you go fishing and catch a little fish, and then every time you tell the story, it gets a little bit bigger.
Fish gets bigger, yeah.
The story you want to, I don't know, what is that? What do we want to do?
Well, just think about the back channel, which, we've talked about it before. The back channel is your non-conscious brain. You don't have control over that. It's pushing forward urges and impulses, and it's framing thoughts that it's pushing forward, and the fish never gets smaller,
right?
It always gets bigger. So that's the back channel's way of being relevant, keeping you relevant, making it good. The story, people are going to enjoy the story more. Right. You're going to get kind of the positive feedback from that, and the bigger it is, the more people go, wow, and that's more positive feedback. And you may not even, and I want to be careful with this, but I would say you probably don't even remember that for most people, because there are people who I believe tell stories bigger than they are, or lie about things for their own reasons, whatever that reason is. I'm not saying there's never a liar. I know people lie about stuff. I know people know what the truth is and say something different.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of times that people say what they think the truth is, even if it isn't. Unfortunately, Brian Williams, they could check his story. Like most of us, there's no way to go check your story.
Yeah.
And his you could, and most people you can't. So I think that it's just we have to realize now when I talk about a memory, I always now I'm now I preface I don't know if this is true or not, but I remember, which isn't a great way to get people to believe your stories when you start out with I don't know
Right.
if this is true.
Right.
But when somebody challenges me and says that's not what happened, I always say, oh, okay. I mean, you're probably right, because not just because I have a bad memory, but just because I understand how memories work. So I don't
Right.
ever argue with people, and it's hard not to, even though I know how memories work. When somebody says that's not what happened, in my mind I'm going, yes, it is, but I'm having to go, oh, then you're probably right, even though my mind's saying no, they're not, because you believe your story.
So, do you know? Is there any research about are some people just born with better memories, better recall of events?
So there's memory tests that you can give to people, and some people score a little bit higher on memory tests, and then some people are like really strong visual, have really strong visual memories, so they can remember better, like eidetic memories and like photographic memories and things
Hmm.
like that. So there are differences just with everything skill related, like maybe not skill, but any type that when there's performance related, there's individual differences. Some people are better or worse, but I want to tell you about this quote about memory, because I don't want to just pound memory like it's really bad and you can never trust it. Because again, the gist is almost always true. It's just the fine details that get meshed around a
Right.
little bit. But Daniel Schachter is a memory researcher, and he wrote a book. It's been probably 20, 25 years ago now, but it's a really good book, and it's called The Seven Sins of Memory. And it tells kind of different ways that the kind of the seven ways that memory will fail you. And in his book, he made a statement. I think it was him. He might have been quoting somebody. I don't remember that, but I'm certain it came from his book, when he said, oftentimes the problem with memory is not what you can't recall, it's with what you can't forget. And that's where memory becomes really a big problem, when something traumatic happens to you and you want to get it out of your mind and forget it and you can't. And you lay awake, you
Oh,
dream it, you think about it, it comes back to you all the time, and you can't get rid of this kind of horrific memory, or just a memory about, even like the breakup I told you. But usually it's
right.
much more than that. But it's like something you said that really hurt somebody. Maybe that's the last time you were able to speak to them, or just different things like that. And you can't get that out of your mind. I'm like, I wish I could forget that. And people always say, I wish there was a way to scrub memories and erase memories. And they're even doing research to try to figure out how to do that. And that's a lot of the time, a lot of that could be even because of like PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, from
Right.
events that happened. I can't forget that event.
And so PTSD, the end of that being disorder, um, meaning, well, can you just kind of talk about why a traumatic event? I mean, how it affects the brain, your memory, and then why we call it a disorder.
Yeah, so it has to be the classifiers is it has to be a traumatic event
Okay.
that happened to you or that you experienced. There is something called vicarious victimization or vicarious trauma that's similar to PTSD, and that can be from investigators that are working with child pornography and stuff like that, where you're
Oh,
having to hear stories or see pictures. You can feel like you've been victimized when it's really somebody else, because you're trying to help them. So there's that part. But usually PTSD happens. We think of it with like soldiers coming back from where at one point, like in the world wars, it was called shell shock, but it was basically PTSD, where you come back from a war zone and you've seen horrific things, and then you have to fit back into life, and you
mm-hmm.
can't get these memories out of your mind, and you panic at the wrong time. You hear, a car backfires or something, or somebody slams a door, and you just like fear rushes over you. And it's the disorder part is when it affects your daily life. You can't live with your
Okay,
daily life because of all these memories that flood back in.
got it. But PTSD, is that not? I mean, it's designed to help us survive, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
And so, help me with that part
Okay.
because
So So let's think about the back channel again.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the back channel's job is to help you survive.
Right.
And then you remember the back channel is always searching for patterns and trying to find patterns and to understand the world better. So now if you are over in war and your brain is trying to help you survive and is looking for patterns and things like that, and it's you are in a Humvee. What do they call the vehicle? Like a vehicle? Is it called a Humvee? Am I right?
Oh, there are Humvees, yeah. Now that I mean, they're using MRAPs and a
Okay,
lot
so
of
an
mine
MRAP.
resistant. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so an
Uh,
MRAP. So you're fault like there's three of you or something traveling,
mm-hmm.
and one of you veers off the road a little bit, or the way you're traveling, you're kind of staggered, and it hits a mine. And the vehicle, flips up and flips, and some
Mm,
people are injured and maybe killed, and you
okay,
see that, and then you see something happen again, or you see friends. This is happening too. So this is really scary to you. And then when you come back from war, now as you're driving, so your brain picks up that pattern, like the sides of the road where there's dirt patches, those could be dangerous. That's where people can die from that. So your brain is now looking for those patches, looking for things because you have to survive in this environment. Now you change environments and you're back in the US and you're driving down the road and you see a patch of dead grass you know, where you were in the war area. That means somebody dug that up and planted something and put it back down and the grass died right there because but that's, if you hit that, that could be the landmine, and you start having that same reaction. I could die, and you might swerve the car, you get the shakes, your heart rate increases, and it's like, I can't even drive down the road now because I see things that
right.
remind me, the patterns remind me of danger of where I just was.
But all that is happening in the back channel,
It's the back
correct?
channel's way to help you survive, and
Right.
it might be, you're in your MRAP. Is that right?
Yeah. Called a Humvee. It's okay. It's fine. But you're in a
I just thought maybe
vehicle.
in your
Uh,
vehicle,
yeah.
maybe somebody has the radio on because you're just cruising along and it's playing a certain tune when that
Oh.
happens. And now you
Mhm.
might be driving back, you're back home in the States and you're driving, and that song comes on and the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. You get really nervous. You might not even understand why you're feeling so stressed and in danger right then. You might not tie the song to that, but that's a song, could be a smell. So your
Mhm.
brain is saying, we almost died right then. So I need to take account of everything that was going on at that moment so that if any of those things are ever happening again, I can alert the fight, flight, freeze system that danger is right here. And so it doesn't, the back channel is not logical. It doesn't say,
Right.
well, it wasn't the song that had anything to do with it. It just goes, the song was playing, dead grass. I was smelling this. It was hot. We almost died. And so now one of those things happened. Something inside you's going, and you might not even know why you're starting to feel this could be bad. And then the song comes, it's really hot. So you're going, I don't like, and then the song comes on. You're like, wait a minute. And then you see dead grass on the side of the road as you're driving. It's like things start to rush back. And now you in a panic state over it because your brain's trying to help you survive. It's going,
Right.
when these things line up, bad things usually follow,
Hmm.
even though logically they aren't going to because you're back home now. And
Right.
yeah,
Right. You're driving down the road in Oklahoma. There's probably not an
yep,
IED, on the side
right.
of the road, but again, it's important to point out the back channel's not logical. It's not, and so it's screaming, we're about to die.
Mm-hmm,
And so, heart rate elevates, you get sweaty palm, all
mm-hmm,
of the things associated with, all of the hormones associated with fight, flight, freeze that
yep.
we talked about in previous episodes. But real quick, because we are getting close to the end of your time here,
Mm-hmm,
I just want a final piece of memory and to tie kind of a lot of things that you brought up together for me. There are different types of memory, right? Because you said, and I wanted to go back to it, and I didn't, about sensory. You were talking about vision
mm-hmm,
and audition. So what you
mm-hmm,
see, what you hear.
mm-hmm.
Um, and so can you just kind of talk about the different types of memories?
Yeah. So all of your sensory systems will
Hmm.
contribute to memory.
Okay.
Um, and this is what's interesting too. Um, when you remember something, you use the machinery in your brain to create a replica, or to create an image of whatever you're remembering. So if there's something called cortical color blindness.
Hmm.
If somebody has a stroke or a bump to the head in a certain area of the brain that adds color to your sensory perceptions, um, then if you ask them, what color is a football, they can't remember, they can't tell you because they can't generate that image. And so unless it's something like, they'll know snow is white because of our sayings, like it's pure as the driven snow, it's as white as snow. So they can say,
Okay.
oh, snow is white because I have that tie. But if there's things that aren't tied together like that, they can't remember it because they can't use their system anymore to create that image in their head. So that shows you too that sensory memories also still use the brain to recreate it. So
Right.
that's part of memory. When you're
Right.
when you're generating, it also shows why memories aren't just a file that you store stuff away. They're generated each time. And so you have those sensory memories, but then there's ways to classify memories outside of that. There's short-term memory, there's long-term memory. Um, the idea originally was that there were these, you kind of draw it in boxes: short-term memory, long-term memory. You draw arrows between it. So I can remember things for, short-term memory lasts for up to 20 to 30 seconds, and long-term memory, could last a lifetime or whatever.
Right.
That's kind of been updated with the idea about consciousness, that it's more about working memory. So working memory is kind of short-term memory, but it just means if you think about having a workbench, that you have your tools sitting around. So your tools and the materials you're going to use are on the shelves behind you. That's more like long-term
Long
memory. You
term.
can pull something off the shelf and put it on your workbench. Now you're aware of it and consciously thinking about it, and then you can put it back late for later.
Hmm.
But as new information comes in, it kind of arrives on your workbench, and then so you have you can have just a few things. Your workbench can't get too full because it's small, so things will fall off. So you can hold just a few items on your workbench, and you can hold them there from 20 to seconds to 2 minutes, depending. And then they slide off. They're always trying to slide off the workbench, so you have to kind of rehearse them to keep them on the workbench. And it's we can remember about 7 things, plus or minus two. So 5 to 9 things can stay on your workbench that you work with. And then you have a short time, unless you keep rehearsing it, they're going to go away. So think about a phone number
I was
is
going to say,
usually,
this is how we came up with phone numbers, right?
yeah, seven
Seven
numbers.
numbers.
But then when we used to have phone books and a phone hanging on the wall, you
Hmm.
would look at the number and say 555 1212 555, and then as you're going to the phone, you're going 555 1212 555 to dial it in, because if
Right.
you don't do that, that 555 1212 will slide off your workbench. So you can rehearse it by continually saying it, but if you're rehearsing one item, all the other items fall off, because that's attention again. You're not paying attention to all of them, or you're not juggling them or shifting your attention between things. You're focusing on one thing and everything else falls off. So that's
Right.
kind of the idea around memory now. And I should also mention, unless you want to respond to what I just said first.
Well, just a real quick question, in that, so short term memory, working memory, long term memory. You also said, at one point in this episode about, how things get moved into long term memory. It was something like emotion. You just brought up rehearsal.
Mm-hmm. So if you
Uh,
rehearse something enough, it will get moved there. If you pay enough attention to it and really attend to the details of it, it can get moved there. Or if it's something that's really emotionally charged, it can
Emotions.
get
Okay.
moved there. And usually we think about storing something in long-term memory as like a fact we learn. Like, what's the capital of Kansas? It's Topeka, and you have to learn that and then store that. And so you have to rehearse it several times to get it there. But emotional things that happen to us get there kind of a different route. They're it's not a fact that we're rehearsing to get there. It's something that's happened to us.
Okay. And then,
And
you already brought up, sorry, but you already brought up, sleep. and the
Mm-hmm.
importance of at least one night of sleep for memory consolidation.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
And so then I was just going to add to all of that the idea
Mhm.
behind attention, because in the last episode we talked about attention, and attention plays a big role in memory, because you have to attend and be aware of something before you can remember it. There's so much stuff going on around you. If your attention doesn't lock in on it, you're not going to remember it later. And so attention plays a big role. So I've had a lot of people tell me things like, man, my memory's getting so bad. I'm really worried. Like, I'm worried because I can't remember things anymore. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't remember things? And it's almost always like, I don't know if I took, like, I'll find out later in the day I didn't take my pills in the morning I thought I had, or I forgot an appointment. I was supposed to go somewhere and it just slipped my mind. I mean, I'm worried about myself because it's just slipping my mind, or I'm not remembering it.
Mhm.
And I always say, and there's ways to test people's memory. There's memory tests that you can do. You could go to see your doctor or whatever to do that. But it's almost always that you have other things on your mind, so you're not paying attention to what you're doing. If you stopped each morning and said, okay, I'm going to brush my teeth right now, and I'm going to look, here's my pill bottle, I'm going to open it up, my little sections, my days of the week, I'm going to open up Wednesday and pour out the pills in my hand and take those, and you are aware you're doing it, you won't forget it. I mean, unless you do have serious memory problems,
Mhm.
you won't forget doing that. And then people, when I tell them stuff like that, they'll later say, oh, I guess there wasn't anything wrong with my memories. No, you had a lot on your mind, so you weren't paying attention to that. Or if you're really stressed and there's a lot of stress going on in your life, that also affects your attention and your memory, and it can affect memory consolidation and other things like that. So stress, memory, there's parts to it. It's encoding the information, and then it's retrieving the information. So you can have, there's disorders where there's problems encoding memories.
Mhm.
There's disorders where there's problems storing memories. And then there's disorders where there's problems recalling those memories. So there can be issues along any of those lines, but almost always, if you pay attention, you'll find out your memory probably isn't as bad as you thought it was. Or if you can reduce the stress in your life in some way, like if you have big deadlines coming up, once those deadlines are passed, you'll probably go, oh yeah, my memory's fine.
When you brought up attention and how important it is in memory, then when we were talking about, attention, social media, like attention spans and all of that, so that plays in, that could have a negative effect on memory, at least retrieval,
Oh yeah, well,
or no, it's actually
encoding probably,
encoding it. Yeah.
because your mind is your on channel, which is your conscious awareness. Your on channel is busy processing a lot of other things that you're doing, and your back channel, the automatic behavior of opening the pill and taking it, which is in your back channel, takes over. So you might have taken your pills and not remembered if you did or not, and then you go, oh yeah, I did. Or maybe
Mhm.
you didn't, because your back channel, you did things out of order of how you normally do it. Like I normally, you know, go to the bathroom, then wash my hands, brush my teeth, take my pills, or something
Right.
like that. And
Yeah.
then that order got mixed up, and your mind was somewhere else, so you forgot to take them. Or there's reasons why, but it's usually those types of memory things are encoding. And
Hmm.
even like, I forgot my keys. I don't know where I put my keys. If you would pay attention, first of all, it's good to have one place to always put your keys. But otherwise, like losing glasses, I told the story about losing my
Hmm.
glasses. It's, if you think when you're doing things, if you do things purposefully, then you're not going to forget that. And I know we can't always do that. It's just, if you're worried about your memory, then for next 2 or 3 days, do everything really purposeful and see if it really is a memory problem. And then when all of a sudden you're remembering everything, you'll go, oh yeah, it's an attentional thing where I'm thinking of other things. I've got a lot on my mind. There's stress in my life. That's what's causing it.
Yeah, because you brought up, putting something in the same spot over and over. I always, not always, but I've struggled with the idea of, um, I want to be in the moment. I try to be mindful. I
Mm-hmm.
practice mindfulness,
Mm-hmm.
try to, pay attention to all the things you're saying. And so one of the things and this is the last question I will have for you, but about, uh, put my keys in the same spot all the time. That is not forcing me to be mindful, That's almost, do you see what I mean? Instead of taking my keys and putting them in different places and making me pay attention to, I am putting my keys on the island and then having to remember that, as opposed to making more things somewhat automatic by going, my keys are always there.
So I would say it depends on your goal. If you're late to work routinely because you can't find your keys, you should pay attention and be mindful, but you should probably also pick one spot to always put them in.
Fair point.
But if you're trying to increase your memory, that's great. And you can do things like that. Like, I'm going to put them in a different place each time and be mindful about where I put them. I wouldn't put them too much in hiding, just in case something goes wrong at that moment. You can't find them again. But yeah, setting them in different places,
but just different locations.
Yeah. Then that makes you mindful, and that could be a good exercise to kind of keep you on your toes, keep your brain working. But I think what you're doing is just, it's not about necessarily keeping your brain efficient and working. It's teaching you to be mindful in the moment, because your brain is still working. It's just, you're mindful of what it's doing. You're mindful in the moment.
Yeah.
So that can be a great exercise. Mixing things up like that can be a good thing to do if you're practicing mindfulness. Yep.
Perfect. I'm going to keep doing it then.
And you didn't ask me in our last episode. I asked you to keep me accountable. And we were talking about, when you brought up social media, it reminded me. Do you remember what you were going to hold me accountable for?
Yeah. How are you with your phone usage? But I was waiting for you to have a movie night, because I thought that we were specifically talking about movie night.
I specifically had a movie night in case you asked about it.
And how were you on your phone usage?
I put my phone down and away and sat through the whole movie.
Oh, good for you.
A little jittery, but there were times I really wanted to pick it up, but I didn't. And by the way, during movies, I don't do social media stuff. I just play a game, like a little.
Right.
So yeah, but I wanted to, just to have something else to do with the movie, and I didn't. And so I made it through the first one. I'm going to keep doing that.
All right. I'll be a better workout partner here. I'll keep you accountable.
All right. Sounds good.
John, thank you so much again for your time, all that information. I just continue to find it so useful in my everyday life. So I appreciate doing this. So
good. I'm enjoying it.
I'm so glad. Okay, I'll talk to you next week.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks, John. And that brings us to the end of another fascinating discussion here on John Teaches Sean About His Brain. I hope you found today's information as insightful as I did. If you're intrigued by what you heard today and you want to dive deeper, I encourage you to go back and listen to our previous episodes, where John has laid all the groundwork for so many of these concepts. We're always looking to continue this journey of understanding our brains together. So if you have any questions about the topics we've covered, or if there's any brain-related mystery you'd like us to try to unravel, we'd love to hear from you. You can connect with us on our social media channels. All the details are in the show notes below. Let us know your thoughts, share your insights, and hey, maybe your question will be featured in a future episode. If you like this episode, tell a friend, a coworker, a family member. And if you love this episode, tell two. Finally, if you're enjoying John Teaches Sean About His Brain, finding these conversations helpful, please don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. With your help, we can continue on this path and work together to make incredible discoveries about the human brain. Thank you.